हेलो दोस्तों, आज मैं आपके सामने में दिल्ली सल्तनत की पॉलिटी के बारे में बताने आया हूँ। और जैसा कि मैंने पूर्व के वीडियो में बताया था कि मैं भारतीय इतिहास में मैंने राइट फ्रॉम द बिगिनिंग ऑफ इंडियन हिस्ट्री, वैदिक पीरियड से लेके और 1947 तक जो विभिन्न प्रकार के राजवंश की स्थापना हिंदुस्तान में हुई है, उसमें खास करके जो इम्पॉर्टेंट राजवंश हैं, इम्पॉर्टेंट डायनेस्टीज़ हैं, उनकी राज्य व्यवस्था के बारे में हमने एक सीरीज़ के तहत में आपके सामने में वीडियो बनाने का काम किया है। इस कड़ी में सबसे पहले हमने वैदिक पीरियड के पॉलिटी के बारे में बताया, उसके बाद में 6th सेंचुरी BC के पॉलिटी के बारे में बताया, और मौर्यन पॉलिटी, गुप्ता पॉलिटी, राजपूत पॉलिटी के बारे में भी हमने अलग अलग वीडियो बनाए हैं। आज हम सल्तनत काल के समय में जो राज्य व्यवस्था थी उसके बारे में हम बताने आए हैं। तो दोस्तों, मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि दिस विल बी वेरी मच बेनिफिशियल फॉर दोज स्टूडेंट्स who are preparing for UPSC and different provincial services examinations. Friends, as you know that Delhi Sultanate started from 1206 to the end of 1526 after the first battle of Panipat, when Ibrahim Lodi was defeated by Babur, and another dynasty, Mughal dynasty, was established in India. So let us see how this Delhi Sultanate established their government in India. What were their special features of governance? There are, as I have already told you, that there are two parts of a polity. One is theory of kingship and another is structure and function of the government. Both together will form the polity of a particular dynasty. In the instant case, Delhi Sultanate is not about one dynasty, but it is about 5 dynasties. They are slave, खलजी, तुगलक, सैयद, there are 5 dynasties, one after another, and all these formed together as Delhi Sultanate, and this continued for 320 years, beginning from 1206 AD to 1526 AD, when the first battle of Panipat took place, and Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi in first battle of Panipat in 1526 AD, and Babur established a new dynasty called Mughal dynasty. This dynasty, Mughal dynasty, had a impact upon Indian politics right up to 1857, when its last emperor, or you can say king, Bahadur Shah Zafar was sent to Rangoon, or sent into exile by Britishers, who became the de jure and de facto ruler of Hindustan. So, now let us proceed further. What were the principles of kingship during the Delhi Sultanate, which ruled continuously for 320 years? Friends, as you know that there were several dynasties, I mean 5 dynasties, one after another. There were slight deviation among the rulers or emperors of this dynasty, but we find that there is common thread of the principle of kingship among all these sultans. What were those common features? Number 1, all sultans took investiture from caliphs of Baghdad. Number 1, except Alauddin Khilji and Mubarak Khalji. Friends, as you know that in those times Caliph had very important role in Muslim world, and according to Islamic law, no other person can be king or the religious head or temporal head, as you can say, except Caliph. This means the principle of Ummah, principle of Ummah among Muslims. This means Ummah means Muslim brotherhood. This principle says that irrespective of region or other differences, all Muslims are brethren in the entire world, and so only one temporal or religious head will be Caliph. This means that the temporal and religious power were vested with Caliphs. And when this Delhi Sultanate was being founded, at that time Abbasid Caliphs were there, and they had Baghdad was their capital. So to get investiture means every sultan wanted that his rule should be recognized by Caliph and the majority religious people like ulemas, Maulvi, so that his rule could be legalized in the eyes of people, and that's why they, all these sultans sought investiture from the caliphs. But As far as the practical politics was concerned, Caliph had no role except moral authority. Caliphs had no role in Delhi Sultanate except exerting moral authority. On sultans. Now the second feature of kingship was, the second feature of the kingship during the Delhi Sultanate was, all sultans were the epitome of all powers. All sultans were epitomes of all powers, that may be administrative, financial, legal matters. Virtually all sultans were autocrats. They were all sultan wanted to convert Hindus into Muslim, but the practical difficulties always stopped them from doing so. As you know, right from beginning of the Delhi Sultanate, or even after the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan in second battle of Tarai, series after series of revolts occurred in northern India, and Hindus could not digest the rule of Muslims or Islam in India. They always revolted during the period of Sultanate, and so the practical politics demanded that Hindus should not be offended to the extreme that it would have been impossible to rule over them, because when a ulema met Iltutmish and exhorted him to convert all Hindus into Muslims, the answer of Iltutmish was that Muslims were just salt in the ocean of Hindus. So that would be practically impossible to convert Hindus into Muslim. But whenever situation demanded, they never hesitated to convert Hindus into Muslim, like prison of wars. Second, the Hindus who were poor, destitute, Hindu nobility who had incurred arrears of taxes. Friends, as you know that the revenue administration or the fiscal administration during Delhi Sultanate was discriminatory. The taxes upon Hindus were even double than that of Muslims, and that's why when Hindu nobility fell into arrears, so they were tempted by erstwhile Muslim rulers, subadars, iqtadars, to convert themselves into Muslims, and then their taxes would be finished off, and no auction of their lands would be effected. So, in order to save from the extreme taxes, from the arrears of taxes, most of the Rajput Hindus were converted, or they themselves converted into Muslims. Friends, as you know that after the second battle of Tarai in 1192 AD, the Muslim rule in India was established, particularly in northern India, and Muhammad Ghori did not rule directly himself, but that rule was delegated by him to his slave Qutbuddin Aibak. Aibak had been instrumental in crushing rebellion in Ajmer and Meerut. He had been helpful in defeating Jaichand of Gahadwala dynasty in 1194. He defeated Chandelas in and captured Kalinjar and Mahoba, its capital. And also Badaun. Badaun was the richest city at that time. Mahoba was the capital of Chandelas. Kalinjar was the strongest fort in eastern India. So, Qutbuddin Aibak was an able leader, an army commander, and so he very much helped his master Muhammad Ghori in subjugating all the recalcitrant elements after the second battle of Tarai. And that's why after getting his confidence, Muhammad Ghori appointed Qutbuddin Aibak as his lieutenant of the Indian acquired territories. After the death of Muhammad Ghori in 1206, his empire was divided into 4 parts. One, Yalduz, his slave. Yalduz became chief of Ghazni, Kubacha, head of Sindh and Multan, Kutubuddin, Lahore means Punjab, and newly acquired territory of northern India up to Bengal. Except Bengal. And fourth, Ali Mardan Khalji, head of Bengal. So friends, after the death of Muhammad Ghori in 1206, his slaves divided their empire into 4 parts. Yalduz became chief of Ghazni because Muhammad Ghori was issueless, so his slaves became the de facto and de jure king of their respective territories. Like Yalduz, it is also called Ildiz, he became the chief of Ghazni. Kubacha, another important slave, became the chief of Sindh and Multan. Kutubuddin Aibak became the head of Punjab, Lahore, and made his capital at Lahore, and acquired newly territories like Rajasthan and northern India, except Bengal. And another, the last slave, Ali Mardan Khalji, became the chief of the Bengal territories. So friends, this way the slaves of Muhammad Ghori divided his empire into 4 parts. What was the kingship theory of sultans of Delhi Sultanate? The next principle was severance of Delhi Sultanate from Ghazni. This principle has always been the motto of all the sultans of Delhi Sultanate, right from the beginning of Kutubuddin Aibak. Although in the initial period he had acquiesced to the sovereignty of Yalduz, who was the head of the Ghazni territory, But later on, Iltutmish, he also feigned to accept suzerainty or sovereignty of Ghazni till 1228. Sorry, 1216. But when he defeated Yalduz, Iltutmish defeated in 1216 in the Battle of Tadai. He declared himself independent of Ghazni, and instead of Lahore, he made Delhi his capital. So the sultans of Delhi Sultanate did not want to involve or embroil into the Central Asia politics, and and that's why they did not want political relationship with Ghazni. This was another important aspect of kingship theory of Delhi Sultanate. An important feature of kingship theory of Delhi Sultanate was effective safeguard mechanism against Mongols. Friends, as you know that those periods were the period of turmoil because of Genghis Khan, who was a Mongol, and you might be knowing that Genghis Khan had become menace for all the contemporary areas and contemporary kings. First of all, Genghis Khan evicted Ghazni, evicted Khwarizm Shah, Khwarizmi. Khwarizmi kings, and those periods were the period of turmoil wrought by Genghis Khan, the great Mongol emperor, who wreaked havoc against the contemporary kings. Like he evicted Khwarizmi kings who had captured Ghazni from the successor of Muhammad Ghori, that is Yalduz. The policy of sultans of Delhi Sultanate was to keep vigil on northern frontier and to make garrison to safeguard north western frontiers from Mongol menace. So, the policy of Iltutmish was to keep neutrality When Khwarizmi kings Jalauddin Mungbarni wanted shelter in India, Iltutmish did not give him shelter at the behest of Chengiz Khan. Number 2, during the period of Balwan, he made lot of forts and garrisoned the entire area, and the area like Samana, Dipalpur and Multan, all these area were grouped together, and he made his son Muhammad as the in charge of north western frontier area. Similarly, Alauddin Khalji and thereafter Muhammad Tughlaq, they all made arrangements to fight against Mongols, and that's why we see that when the grandson of Chengiz Khan, after 50 years, named Kublai Khan, ransacked Iraq, Baghdad, and killed Caliph. Because of the vigilant policy adopted by because of the vigilant policy adopted by sultans, Mongols could not penetrate into India. Otherwise, the entire demographic contours would have been changed forever. So, this is the greatest contribution of sultans of Delhi towards India, that the Mongol menace could be averted by the jealous policy of sultans of Delhi. Now we come to another important point regarding the principle of kingship. Friends, as you know that after the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan and thereafter the various Rajput kings, the Sultanate of Delhi was established in major parts of northern India. Now, the sultans of Delhi and particularly Iltutmish, who was the real founder of Delhi Sultanate, started the practice of Iqta. Iqtadari system. This system was prevalent in Muslim worlds, particularly in Arab world, and now this system has been borrowed with certain modification into India. Friends, as you know that in previous lecture I have already told you that one of the reason for the defeat of Rajput princes or rulers was that during those periods the Samantas or the feudatories became too much powerful, and not only they granted lands to the secular officers but also Brahmanas on large scale. The result was that with the passage of time, the people became very much narrow-minded in their thought, because now the tax was being collected by Samant or the feudatories. With the result, the loyalty of people with the king became a distant proposition or dream. That's why when the battle took place between two civilizations, I mean Islamic civilization and another Hindu civilization, the Hindu civilization was defeated. Why? Because during that period, people developed localism. This thought of localism was reinforced by different Dharma Sutras, which exhorted people or which forbade people not to cross oceans. And those person or the Hindus who crossed oceans or sea, they were outcast, with the result that Hindus did not get the latest technology regarding military warfare, new techniques, new weaponry, and the result was the crushing defeat of Rajputs, who were the leader of Hindus at that time. The one example will suffice to tell to prove this, that when the fort of Bhatinda, situated in Punjab, was captured by the forces of Muhammad Ghori within 3 days, that fort was under the jurisdiction of Prithviraj Chauhan. But the same fort of Bhatinda was recaptured by Prithviraj Chauhan and his forces after a gap of 13 months. This shows the military weakness of Rajput princes or kings. Friends, now this feebleness in the body politic of Rajput was obvious because of the major tracts of land given to secular officers in lieu of salaries. Not only that, these officers who later turned out to be Samantas or feudatories, they got administrative and financial power. They could raise tax at their own pleasure without the concurrence of the prince or the king, Rajput king. So, there started the process of decentralization, and the king more or less become very weak as so far as the administration is concerned. And that's why a small band of Muslim army defeated a series of Rajput princes one after another within 15 years after the second battle of Tarai, and the Delhi Sultanate could be established throughout the northern India, right from the Bay of Bengal to Arab Sea, and there was no obstruction on their path from the Hindus. Now, this system of granting lands to government officers was done away with, and that was replaced by Iqtadari system. What is this Iqtadari system? Iltutmish divided the tracts of northern India between iktas. These iktas, the tracts of land, was headed by mukti or walis. These muktis had to keep a fair amount of military troops and to pay these troops, muktis got taxes from ikta. After defraying the cost of expenses, the rest of the money was transferred to central government. The iktadars, mukti or iktadars, had no ownership on land. They could only collect taxes. They can be transferred from one place, one ikta to another ikta. These ikta later on turned out to be suba or provinces in later period. There were 4 types of iktas. One, large tracts of land headed by mukti. He had got power of administration and finance. He could collect taxes to meet all his expenses incurred upon troops and other government staffs, and after defraying the cost of expenses, the rest of money was sent to the central government. In addition, he was also in charge of administration of that ikta, law and order, security of the people. So later on, these large tracts of ikta converted into suba or provinces. During Akbar's period, another kind of ikta was a small tracts of land given to troopers for the upkeep of their horses, and instead of salary they were given tracts of land around Delhi. These were small tracts of land and they were also called ikta, but troopers were not responsible for the administration or finances of that small tracts of land. That was the sole monopoly of mukti or iktadars. Third category of Third category of ICTA was for those troopers or government servant for giving pension to them by allotting a piece of land instead of cash salary. The fourth category was like Rajput period, religious grants of lands. These lands were called Inam land. Inam lands were given to those people who were scholars, learned people. So there were four types of ICTAs, but we are concerned here with the first type of ICTA, where the ICTAdars were not the owner of land. They can't give or grant land to anybody without the approval of the central government or sultan, or they could not use, they could not mint coin, nor they can read khutbah, a sign of sovereignty in his name. The possession of elephants was the sole preserve of Sultan. So they had to, all the iqtidars had to, whenever they captured any elephant or war elephant, they had to hand over to sultans or the central government. Secondly, if any royal family were captured by iqtidars, like the princess, their family members, all these members were to be handed over to central government by iqtidars. So there were certain limitations or iqtidars. They could be transferred from one iqta to another, as I have already told you. So this way, the sultans of Delhi Sultanate, by carving out iqta, made an arrangement for collection of taxes and for the expansion of the territories of Sultanate. Hello friends, so far we have described the different features of principles of kingship during Delhi Sultanate. Two important factors that I just want to described before you are military and second religious policy of different sultans. Friends, as you know that the rule of sultan or the character of the Delhi Sultanate was military in character. Since the theory of succession or a principle of succession did not develop during those periods, only the military strength decided who was going to become the next sultan, and that's why the main focus of all the important sultans during the Delhi Sultanate was to give utmost importance to military organization. Sultan was the military commander. He led the army in the battlefield. The level of his autocracy or despotism was decided by the strength of his army, and that's why you see Iltutmish was the first sultan who organized military on a different note from the previous Rajput rulers. He was the first sultan to give cash salary to troopers, सैनिकों को. During the period of Alauddin Khilji, he organized a standing army of 4,70,000 cavalry, and the strength of infantry was more than the number of cavalry force. In addition, he had got also elephantry, the elephant force. So this huge army was deployed for the expansion of Delhi Sultanate, and during his reign, the Sultanate, the outer boundary of Sultanate reached as far as Madurai in the South India, and the entire Hindustan, right from northwestern frontier area to south, and from Bengal to Arabian Sea to Sindh, the entire area came under his control because of the strength of the army organized by him. The salary of one trooper of an infantry was 156 rupees tanka per year. For cavalry, the cavalryman who has got his horse, the salary of a cavalryman was 234 tanka. This means 156 plus 78 tanka, that is 234. And if a cavalryman had two horses, do aspa, that was called in Urdu do aspa. This means that his salary was 312 tanka, meaning by 78 tanka was given for the upkeep of one horse. So friends, this was a handsome salary given by Alauddin Khalji, and that's why we see that during his period, 20 years of his tenure, right from 1296 to 1316, a period, a span of 20 years, there was no revolt from the army. And this handsome salary can be visualized from the fact that after 200 years, when Sher Shah became the emperor of Hindustan, he used to give 230 tanka to a cavalryman. ₹4, 4 tanka short of 4 tanka, even after 200 years. And during the Akbar, the salary of a cavalryman was 240 tanka. So you can understand that Alauddin kept his army men satisfied, and because of the excellent administration of army, Alauddin could capture far and wide of India or Hindustan at that time, when the communication system was very much difficult. This handsome salary was provided by him because of the market policy. Which was headed by Diwan-e Risalat and Sahna-e Mandi, where right from cloth to slaves or food grains, horses, all commodity had been fixed prices, and show the burden on exchequer could not be affected because of the regulation of prices during those days. Whenever the strength of army weakened, the particular dynasty declined and another dynasty within the Sultanate arose and supplemented it. So we see 5 dynasties within a span of 320 years of Delhi Sultanate. Now we come to the religious policy of Delhi Sultanate Sultans. The religious policy of Sultans of Delhi Sultanate was very much pragmatic. Why? Because right from the beginning they came to visualize that it is not possible to convert India or Hindustan, which is a majority Hindu area, dominated Hindu area. So this is not practically possible, and in spite of the exhortation by ulemas or the ambassadors from Iraq or Baghdad, different sultans refrained from converting Hindus into Muslim as a state policy, because they thought that in the case of direct adoption of conversion, the degree of rebellion or Hindu rebellion may increase, and it would be very much difficult for them to administer such a long areas. And that's why when exhorted by a ulema, Iltutmish told him bluntly that Muslims are just like a salt in the ocean, and so this is not practically possible to convert Hindus into Muslims as a state policy, but all the sultans under the influence of ulemas, Maulvis, mullah, or from the ambassadors of Baghdad, they tried to convert Hindus into Muslims by another means, by allurement. By freeing Hindu prisoner of war, prisoners of war, by tempting to become Musalman, or by Sufi saints who exhibited different kinds of supernatural power possessed by them, and so under the impression of Sufi saints, the lower class people from Hindus got themselves converted into Muslims. Another factor was the obnoxious caste system, where the lower class like Sudras were treated as animals or second-rate citizens. So, in order to come out from the Hindu religion and the discrimination meted out to them, they came out from the Hindu religion and adopted Islam in large numbers. Now, friends, we have delineated the different principles adopted by Sultans of Delhi during Delhi Sultanate. Now, we discuss about the structure and function of the government. What were their structures? You must know that during the initial period or even during the Sultanate period, the administration of Sultanate was in a formative phase, was in a primitive phase. So, it was a military state, and so civil administration was not so much developed. But with the passage of time, certain functionaries evolved and they were assigned different tasks for the governance of the Delhi Sultanate. Now, let us see who were the important functionaries during the Delhi Sultanate. Number 1, Wazir. He was head of the revenue and finance, and he was assisted by Musrif A. Mumalik, and who was, you can say, accountant general, and Mustafi A. Mumalik, auditor general. These two officers assisted him, Wazir, and in addition to revenue and finance, he was also in charge of the superintendence over all other departments. He was next to Sultan of Delhi, if there was no Naib Sultan. As you know that during the period of Nasiruddin Mahmud, a post of Naib Sultan was created, and Balwan was the Naib Sultan for the last 20 years before he became Sultan of Delhi Sultanate. So, if the post of Naib, later on he abolished this post, but if there was no post of Naib Sultan, then after the all-powerful Sultan, the next post was the most important, and that post was held by Wazir. Second post was R.J. Mumalik. He was the head of the army or military. He was just second to Sultan. His work was to superintend over the army, to recruit army, to organize army, to redress the grievances of army men. So R.J. Mumalik was the important functionary during the Delhi Sultanate. Third post was Qazi ul Quzat, means chief Qazi. He was to decide the cases which were based upon Islamic laws. And the next important functionary was Wakil-e-Dar. He was in charge of royal household, and all the management of royal household was under his command. So he was the most trusted man or officer of Sultan during those days. The next important officer was Barid-e Mumalik, and he was head of the state news agency. And the next in importance was Amir-e Majlis. His main work was to organize royal feast, royal festivals. These things were under his command. Now Dabir-e Mumalik, and he was in charge of royal correspondence between Sultan and the other functionaries of the Delhi Sultanate. Next in importance was Sadr-us-Sudur. When the Delhi Sultanate got established in India, two important posts were created. One was Sadr-us-Sudur and another was Qazi ul Quzat. Both the Sadr-us-Sudur was in charge of religious matters, particularly the civil matters, ecclesiastical matters, and Amir-e-Dad, he was the in charge of public prosecutors. Whenever a case was filed, he worked as public prosecutors on behalf of the state or Delhi Sultanate. So these were the important functionaries during the Sultanate period. Now we switch over to provinces. As you know, during the Delhi Sultanate period, provinces were very much in nascent phase. Earlier it was Iqta. Later on, with the passage of time, it developed into provinces. Now the head of the province was Mukta ya Mukti or Wali, as I have already told you. Second officer in command was Nazir or Waqaf, and his function was to collect taxes. And third officer was Sahib-e-Diwan. His work was to maintain accounts of provinces or Iqta, and then all the expenditures and income were prepared by him and then sent to the central government, I mean Delhi Sultanate, for its verification, for its approval. Below provincial administration, there was 6. Now you can say this equivalent to district, and it was headed by Sikdar. Equivalent to district collector. Below Sikh, every Sikh, it was divided into Parganas. It was a group of villages, say 40, 50, 60 villages, which constituted a single Pargana. And Amil or Nazir were some of the important officers to rule over Parganas, and the lower unit was village, which was administered by the village headman, as we have seen in the Rajput period or even before that. So now friends, we see that there are 4 types of land during those Delhi Sultanate period. One was Khalisa. This was, you can say, this was a crown land, and the taxes were collected directly from peasants in those areas. Second was Waqf land or say Inam land. These lands were given to religious dignitaries, learned persons, and they were free from taxes. And land held by muktis. And third category of land was held by muktis, I mean iqtadars, and they collected taxes, and after defraying the cost that he incurred during collection of taxes, rest of the money were transferred to Delhi Sultanate. And the fourth kind of land was held by Hindu defeated Rajas or princes. They were supposed to give annual homage to Sultan, and in return the Hindu Rajas or princes were left free in their internal matters. So, most of the subjugated Hindu princes were not annexed by sultans, but they kept under certain obligation. This policy is called paramountcy. This means that the Delhi Sultan did not assume sovereignty over the vanquished Hindu territories of princes, but they were kept under certain obligations to pay annual tax to the Sultan, and in return Hindu princes were given freedom in their internal matters. This is called principle of paramountcy. So, they did not outrightly annex the areas held by Rajput princes in maximum cases. So, this policy of paramountcy was later on, after 600 years later, policy of paramountcy was adopted by Lord Wellesley by subsidiary alliance, wherein the princes or Indian princes were obliged to pay certain amount of money annual as taxes, and in return the company government took the responsibility of defending their boundaries, I mean foreign policy. We will make a different video on this topic. Now, let us move over another important point. During the Sultanate period, there are 4 types of taxes. One was zakat, that was levied from the rich Muslims, only rich Muslims, for the needy, poor, and this was the old age custom right from the period of Caliphate in Baghdad, where we see so many charity houses existing during the Abbasid period, where needy, destitute took free food, and this langar system was later on adopted by Sikhs in 15th century. Now, this was the zakat. That zakat was 2.5% of the income. Second was kharaj. It was a land revenue tax, and 15 to 20% of produce was levied as taxes. This was the land revenue. Third was the khams. Khams on a booty. Booty, according to Islamic laws, if an army captures booty after defeating the opponents, one fifth will go to the Sultan or Caliph and 4/5 to army. But in India, this principle was never followed by any Sultan of Delhi Sultanate. Instead of 1/5, they always demanded 4/5 of the booty, and the rest 1/5 went to army men as booty. And the last important and discriminatory tax was jizya. This tax was 2.5% from Hindus, and according to Islamic law, in a Muslim country, the person who are going to another faith or another religious faith, he has to give certain amount as taxes for their protection. So this was the practice prevalent since the days of Prophet, and this jizya tax was levied from Hindus, and its quantum of tax was 2.5%. Although this quantum was very much meager, but it was discriminatory, and it suggested Hindus as a second citizen of their own homeland. In addition to all these taxes, Sultan also levied taxes from trade and octroi duty. So, friends, I have discussed about the Delhi Sultanate, its principles of kingship, and the structure and function of the government during those time. As I have already told you, that Delhi Sultanate was a military state, and the power and function and even the contour of the government depended upon the strength of army. And so every Sultan tried his best to organize his army in a novel way, so that they could control the refractory elements who were raising their heads time and again in the alien land. That's why so many sultans died during the war of successions, and only the strength of military decided who was going to be the next sultan. So friends, I think that you have come to know lot of things about the Delhi Sultanate, its polity. I think it will be very beneficial for you for the civil services examination. If you have any suggestion, you just write me. If you like this video, please subscribe, like and share. It will boost up my morale. Thank you very much.